Hello. For those of you who do not know me, my name is John Bassford. I've spent my career launching and managing operations, really with an eye towards creating efficient, effective operations. And through that work, I still do a lot of work on operations, but also a lot of what I've done also tends to be around leadership training, executive coaching, as well as culture management. I have seen kind of firsthand throughout my career how culture really does play a role in the success and vibrancy of an organization. And so this talk is entitled Building a Culture That Fuels Breakthroughs, building teams that think bigger, move faster, and drive meaningful change. This is being recorded because I've had several people who have requested that to be so. So I just want to let everyone be aware of that. Another thing, real quick, that I want to note while we're going through the presentation, throughout my career, I have probably learned more about culture from experiencing the negative than I have the positive. And culture is a living, breathing thing that is not static. It changes. It's spoken and unspoken. And because of that, I tend to use a lot of real personal stories, real analogies about what works and doesn't work in culture to really bring this to life. So I'm going to be sharing those throughout this presentation. But the first step in all of this is, what is culture? What is this piece of the puzzle that we call culture? Culture is the shared beliefs, behaviors, and expectations, spoken and unspoken, that guide your organization. That's kind of a traditional definition of culture, a workplace culture that's been adopted. But I often like to look at this in regards to action. And when it comes to action, a culture is what your team believes gets rewarded, tolerated, and punished. I think that is more meaningful and to see how culture affects our organizations. Behind every breakthrough is a culture that gave people permission to think differently. Behind every stalled initiative, a culture that didn't. I'm going to really showcase throughout the next 45 minutes here some great examples that really show how culture makes a difference when it's done both incorrectly and correctly, both the positive and negative here. So if you've heard any of my talks before, you know that I'm constantly talking about our roadblocks to success, both at the organization level and the leadership level, are all geared around comfort, fear, and habits. I talk about this on the leadership side, but the thing that's important is that it does affect the culture as well. When comfort, fear, and habits are stuck in the way, leaders, CEOs, managers, they tend to not trust the staff. They're afraid to experiment, which means they're afraid to let others experiment. You protect the status quo. You focus on performance, not potential. You avoid discomfort, which also means you avoid change. This is not just a leadership problem. Yes, it starts with the leadership, but it truly filters down through the entire organization, throughout the entire team. And when the base of control is 100% fear. It's fear of letting go, fear of the unknown. And so what we do is tend to grasp hold of things. We control things. We think we can control them, but control really is an illusion. We micromanage. We have this top down authoritative way of doing things. And when that happens, there are inevitably things that the staff respond to, and how it interacts with them, and what control and fear throughout a organizational culture. It really teaches people to stay in their lanes. Don't point out problems. Don't offer new ideas. Minimize your contribution. And because of that, they tend to feel unfulfilled, end up leaving the organization to one that actually will give them what they're looking for. This is how innovation dies silently, or in many cases, never even forms. It's all through the culture. So our first case study is a organizational example. Well, I was part of a startup. I was the fourth employee hired, and this was a new organization, cutting edge, smart, ambitious founders. Stakeholders involved some of the biggest companies in the world, and they really thought that they were building this innovative organization that was just going to make things happen, change the world, this sort of thing. And quite frankly, it ended up being anything but that. The some of the behaviors that existed in this organization, for one, it was a very cutthroat environment. There's probably a point in time where once a month someone's being fired. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for not. I've heard things like, "We have one chance to get this right." I don't care if you think, I want you to think like me. There was favoritism involved, and it really just was an environment that wasn't positive. I think every employee that worked there, almost every employee, I should say, I don't want to speak for everyone, would call it toxic. There were some people that left abruptly, uh, don't have anything nice to say about the founders, about the organization, and would never work with any of them ever again. I mean, it was that bad of an environment, despite the fact that it paid well. We had great benefits. We had no official PTO policy and had that flexibility, but none of that mattered. And I think that's a lot of times where CEOs get get confused about what truly motivates their staff. It's not, salary and bonuses, all that stuff are great, but that's not what keeps them there. Because of the environment and the leadership of the organization, they had extremely high turnover. There was no innovation. Results just ended up stagnating. And although they thought they were building this results oriented organization from the top down, in all reality, what the management and the culture of that place did was teach people one thing: your head is always on the chopping block. The best way to help keep your job is to keep your head down, do as little as possible, just do your basic job, and never put yourself too far out there to where you get exposed. That's what it taught people how to keep their jobs. And I want you to think about that. If your staff is worried to speak up, worried to speak out, worried to bring forth an idea, how is it ever going to be possible for the organization to move forward, to grow, to change, and to innovate? The top down culture and management style, in my opinion, is obsolete. We no longer work on assembly lines. Majority of people, yes, there are assembly lines do exist. Let's not kid ourselves here, but majority of us do not work on assembly lines. We're not building a single part 20 times a day, and we're building that part regardless of what happens around us. In today's working environment, it is much more collaborative. Accounting has insights into how sales works and what affects the accounting process, and vice versa. If sales is saying one thing to a client about what the next expectation is in the process, and accounting doesn't match that, that causes friction. If client services gets a call and says, "Hey, I was promised X by the sales team and that's not happening," each department has a unique insight into the organization and how it's running and how every other department is affecting them. And that's why, it's really important to really create that environment that is not just top down. Today, teams want meaning, voice, purpose, impact. This is about leaders being the conductor. And by conductor, I don't mean a train conductor. I mean musical conductor, an orchestra, right? What does a conductor do? It keeps the rhythm and the pace. Sure, it makes sure everyone's playing the same music, and it makes sure they're staying on pace throughout the performance, but allows each and every um, member of the band to be the expert in their own music, in their instrument. And that's really how we need to be looking at getting away from this top down way of management and telling people exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, and creating a different environment. So throughout my career, I have been a change agent. It is look, I'm someone who probably since I was 7, 8, 9 years old was told you're going to be a great lawyer one day. I like to argue. I like to push back. It is very, very natural for me. I was a philosophy major in undergrad. I went on to law school. Never ended up practicing law, but got my JD. And I fell into initially association management work, and then started working more with some startups. And small businesses. But even in my very, very first role, I literally came back from a training trip where I was traveling the country, training leaders on what our organization did, that sort of thing. I do apologize if you hear a little bark in the background. But it just was natural to me to spark change. And I came back for my training um, for the first 2 weeks, and there was a massive hole that I saw that existed in the organization. And we were telling people what to do, but we had no place where we are showing them. So I went back in there with my curiosity arm, like, hey, I am being told to tell these people these things, but where is this located? And so, like, we broke that down, and we changed the way it worked. And I have had the luxury of throughout my career of working for bosses. I don't think they always intended to have a culture that allowed for questioning and allowed for that kind of curiosity. But my relationship with them and how I did it and how I went about things, it happened naturally. And there's no doubt that the success I've had throughout my career has been because I have worked with people who have allowed me to ask questions, to bring forth new ideas. But that's because I naturally do that. That is in my nature. But when you think about the employee that doesn't have that in their nature, are they going to be willing to speak up and speak out? Are they going to be able to point out problems? We have all been in some kind of staff meeting, department meeting, whatever, where some problem has been discovered. And the CEO, the manager goes to the person who kind of really implements that part of the job, whatever it is, and says, "Hey, this is wrong. We've been doing this wrong." And the person says, "Yeah, I know. I've known for months." And what happens? That person, the manager or CEO says, "Well, why didn't you tell us?" And they're mad at the employee for not speaking up. But I actually challenge my CEOs and leaders to look inward on that. You need to be looking at what it is in your organization, in your culture, in your management that didn't allow that employee to feel like they could speak up. And that's really what we're going to be talking about here today. So, first of all, how does I'm talking about changing culture and building a culture that drives innovation, growth, and change? Where does it start? I'm a big believer that culture must be led from the top. Now, culture is going to form regardless. Let's put that out there right away. That no matter whether you're intentional with your culture or you're not, a culture is going to form. Now, the reality of this situation is that when we don't define our culture, when we don't lead our culture, the culture that usually results is one that we do not want. I'm a big believer that you can't delegate your culture. You can't delegate it to your staff. You can't delegate it to a consultant. Sure, you can tap into someone like me, or there's plenty of culture consultants that are out there that help you'll frame it and communicate it and do it the right way, 100%. But if the CEO doesn't live it, it won't last. So I worked for another organization. Again, I was brought in as a change agent CEO for this organization, and I was brought in at a turnaround phase. The culture was broken at the time. They had just laid off half their employees. It was kind of directionless, right? But when I came in, they had already had some elements of a culture. They had done some cool things. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Colby, but there's colors involved with different personalities, and the team got everyone, like Yeti type cups with their color, and it made it real fun, and that part was neat, right? It didn't drive any change, but it was fun, and it was the staff really enjoyed that. But something began to happen. These little exercises, the colors, the numbers, etc., because the culture wasn't really built intentionally. These all elements were just nice to haves. It began to be weaponized. The whole point of doing these culture assessments and personality assessments is to understand. And it's about understanding other people and how to relate with other people and how we communicate with other people. It's about understanding others. But what this team began to do little by little was they weaponized it and said, hey, I'm this color. You can't talk to me that way. You can't expect this from me. And it really started to destroy the culture. So, like, I started seeing this happen. I'm like, we've got to bring someone in. We got to straighten this culture out. And I hired a consultant, hired a team that came in and did the workshops and everything. And, but when I left, probably, 2 or 3 months into this process, I had reached back out later to a colleague that was still working there and asked how this all was still going. They're like, stopped. The minute you left, it stopped. Now the CEO puts it on me because I drove it, but here's the truth why it failed, right? The CEO didn't own it. The all the fun culture stuff, values weren't really modeled. It wasn't action based. These are all just little nice to haves. And I've actually, from that experience in the work I've done since with about creating a curious culture, et cetera, I've actually really come to believe that these workshops where the team defines the culture is not the best way to go about it. I truly believe that these tools are not enough. Having consultants that help you in the process, great, but it's got to be about the leader being involved, the leader owning it. This is not about decoration. This should be about your culture rebuilding, should be about what is going to drive the actions and the attitudes that I want to see in this workplace. If it's a traditional workplace, build a culture on that. If you want to innovate, grow, and change, it's got to be something that you believe in, that you champion, and that you lead every step of the way. So, what is the fix from this old way of doing things, top down, micromanagement, uh, silos, hierarchy? For me, the answer is a curious culture. A curious culture is one where curiosity is not just encouraged, but expected. It's a culture that empowers people at every level to question assumptions, challenge outdated processes, propose new ideas, and explore better ways of working. Uh, I'm often asked, how do I define a curious culture? Obviously, I just gave some of the elements there, but to me, it's more than a singular definition. It is a combination of elements and structures that exist. And I believe that if organizations truly want to innovate, grow, and change, if they want to empower their staff, have their staff be contributing factors in the success of the organization, creating a curious culture is really the best way to do that. So, what are the foundations of a curious culture? Well, one element of it does kind of pull from servant leadership. That is not a new idea. It's been around for decades and talked about maybe even longer, probably before my time. But it's all about like how leaders can remove barriers. They're constantly asking, how can I help you? Again, it goes back to that conductor model, right? Of leading the pathway and instructing the music to flow, but allows these individuals to perform their own music and being a supporter in that. But I think for me, curious leadership and a curious culture goes much farther. It encourages leaders to ask even more, to listen more, to give up even more control. And I believe you have to be curious about how you can improve as a leader and how you can invoke um, that same mentality in your staff. You've probably heard me say this before, that unless you're the lead singer of a one-person band, you have to bring the team along with you. And creating a curious culture is absolutely a step towards that direction. Another key element of this is actually psychological safety. People need to feel safe. They need to feel safe to speak up, to speak out. The thing that always comes to mind when talking about psychological safety is, when you're on the metro in a major city, whether in the US, internationally, whatever, the see something, say something mentality exists, right? Like if you see a backpack that's unattended, etc., that you speak to someone, you go to someone, you feel comfortable in going to the police officer or work or whatever, saying, "Hey, I found this." We need that in our organization without creating psychological safety, creating that. I know this is kind of a buzzword that's been ostracized a little bit, but creating the safe space, and I don't mean safe rooms in the way it was kind of dragged when it came out, but truly creating that environment where people feel safe to bring forth ideas, to question ideas, to point out problems. If you don't have that, you have that top down hierarchy, micromanagement, yes culture, which again will help get tasks done, but it doesn't help move things forward. The concept of psycho safety, when I was researching and writing for my book, The Curious Leader, it actually comes from a study that Google did. Now, this is not some academic study that they outsourced, whatever. This was an internal study that they did, where they studied 180 teams, thousands of interviews and surveys. But the point of their project was to find and understand what made teams successful. They had their hypotheses, diversity, degrees, all of these things. And the number one factor that came back was psychological safety. So this is, when I talk about creating this environment, it is backed by science, and backed by a study and backed by those things done by one of the most successful, innovative countries throughout history, because of their culture of allowing experimentation, that sort of thing. That's why we have Gmail. They have something called the 80-20 rule, that like 20% of your time can be spent on exploring, experimenting something that is not in your daily job. And again, that's how we got Gmail. That's how we other tools and products that exist in Google's portfolio exist because someone sought that out, explored those ideas when it wasn't their daily job. Just think about most of our cultures and organizations. How many bosses, how many managers let you step away from your day-to-day duties and say, "Hey, look, I have an idea. I'm not sure what's going to come of that yet, but I want to explore this. Can I have some time to do that?" Most people say, "No, we're too busy. There's not enough time in the day. Get back to work." And we'll that's not your job, right? That's what we constantly hear. So obviously, building a new culture is not this one size fits all thing. Even us talking about how to build a curious culture. Again, I wrote several chapters of a book about this. I've done a lot of webinars. I talk about this constantly on podcasts. There's a lot to this, but I want to highlight some very, very specific things that I believe will showcase what I mean by creating a curious culture, what I mean by creating an environment that has psychological safety. So, being a curious leader and wanting to create a curious culture, you want to be asking your staff things like, what would make your job better? When we're talking about reviews and everything, it's usually, how are you doing in your job? We're not normally asking, how do we make your job better? What's something the organization is tolerating that we shouldn't be? What are those old rules, habits, traditions that we are doing that are no longer serving the organization? What do you see that I don't? And again, this is why a lot of the operational and culture stuff I talk about goes back to leadership mentality. Is you have to be a little humble, right? We have this mentality or thought process that leaders have to know, see, and do everything. Like that's why they're at the top. They get the job done. They're the ones that have to drive this change, solve the problems, and do all these things. And rarely do they stop and ask, what do you see that I don't? Because I guarantee you, if you start talking to your staff with creating an environment that involves psychological safety, you're going to uncover problems so much quicker. You're going to get to solutions so much quicker. You're going to get new ideas so much quicker. Truly building an environment around curiosity that allows for this open dialogue to happen is the best way to move your organization. And again, going back to what we talked about at the beginning, it's not just about improving the operations of the organization. You're also engaging your staff better. They're feeling more fulfilled. They're going to stay longer. It's going to help with turnover and employee retention. It's going to, one thing I always like to talk about in the generation gap in culture and workplace is, we often hear the younger generation just want to do what they want to do. They want to do all the work. But I challenge you on this. If you have an employee that is doing 90% of what they hate to get a paycheck and 10% what they join, versus getting to know your staff, understanding what makes them tick, understanding what makes them excited about coming to work, and you give them 90% of what they want to be doing and 10% what they have to tolerate to get that paycheck, which one do you think is going to show up more often, on time, energetic, enthused, bring more ideas? And I know that this seems like this some new age concept, but Napoleon Hill at the beginning of the 1900s was talking about these things in his books. Obviously, some of them weren't published 2 years later, but these aren't new concepts of having people in your organization who are inspired to work. So here are some real mechanisms that you can put in your organization that can truly move the needle. Weekly meetings with a safe space for dissent and open conversations. Include curiosity and performance reviews. Having leaders speak last and asking the new person. I'm going to spend a little bit of time breaking this down. Again, I know the term safe space was ostracized a while ago as seeing this soft environment where we're catering to people's emotions. But obviously, I'm not using it in that context, but really in a context of allowing an environment where people truly feel open. And if you want to create that environment with people, open conversations is the only way to do this. And that starts with one-on-one conversations. Yes, there are times for group meetings. Again, I believe that a CEO has to lead the culture from the start. So I believe, when you want to make these changes, you get up there and you say, look, guys, we're going to change things around here. We're going to open this up. I want to hear from you. You guys are the life of this organization. You're the ones who get things done. I'm here to help remove the barriers and help you along this process. So we're going to start having some one-on-one dialogues. We're going to start having team meetings where it's not just me sitting there talking or the manager sitting there talking, but we're going to exchange ideas and have that free flowing. So first of all, you want to get out and lead this. Tell the team that you're ready for a change. You're making a change, and that change involves them for the better. And one of the best ways to really start that is, especially again, going back to my early example, where not everyone is a change agent. Not everyone's going to speak out. I think too often leaders confuse type A personalities with type A players. Some of your best players on your team, organizational team, are probably the ones who don't speak out, who don't lead the way in a meeting and this and that. So you got to learn and got to meet with them one-on-one to make them feel comfortable. Start getting ideas from them one-on-one. And I think little by little, you are going to see that that openness happen in a group setting because they know it's a safe space. Again, this is not about, new agey stuff. This is about creating an environment where ideas flow. Bring curiosity into reviews. This is something I've done the last couple organizations where I've ran the review process is I have pulled away from this archaic number situation, right? Of rank yourself from 1 to 5 or me rank you from 1 to 5, how you're doing these areas. You know what? If you're waiting for an annual review for an employee to know how they're doing and how you view them, then it's all wrong, right? It's this not the world we live in. You need to be assessing people real time, knowing how their work, what's happening, what's not happening, helping them solve problems, all those type of things as the year goes on. But make your review process, obviously, some element of assessment can exist, but make your review process so much more about how to move the organization forward, how they can help, what you see in them, inspire them. How they can, how you can help them, even what they see in you, allow them to help you as the leader, as the CEO, as the manager. And these last two things here that I have on the list, leader speak last and asking the newest person, I think really showcase what it means to create a curious culture and how it's different from that old mentality. Unless you have really strong type A people who are really willing to cross the CEO or the manager, the leader of the meeting, or you've already created this curious culture, when leaders speak first, we've all been in the meetings, right? Like you're rehashing the event that happened or talking about next steps or whatever it may be. The leader gets up there, gives their description of what happened or what they'd like to see, points some fingers, blah, 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 and says, we need to solve this, gives their examples of how to solve the problem. And then after they just this whole thing of dissecting and pointing fingers and bringing about their own solutions, then they ask the team, what are your thoughts? You just brought that entire team your direction, right? Because again, if these mechanisms are not in place, if you don't have the psychological safety element in place, even if someone disagrees, 99 out of 100 times, they're going to water down their response. Like, yeah, I agree with this, but maybe we thought this. When the answer is no, that's not the problem. That wasn't what happened here, right? When leaders speak first, they bring the entire discussion their direction, which creates this biased persona, biased perception from their staff. But if you flip that around, again, I would speak this from the beginning. I really want to know how you guys see this. I want to hear you describe what happened. I want to hear you talk about what went wrong, what went right. And most importantly, I want to focus on how we solve this problem going forward. How do we not repeat it? How do we move in a positive direction? And I want to hear from you. And I want you to speak first because I don't want my opinions and my views of this to affect yours. I want your honest, unbiased, unfiltered opinion about this project, about this program, about this event, what happened and what we need to do to move things forward to make things better. If you can start doing that, that is going to be a catalyst for the curious culture. We've also all sat in meetings when there's a new staff member, it's their first week, second week, and the manager, CEO calls on them and says, "Hey, what did you think about this?" What happens immediately? Everyone rolls their eyes, right? Like, oh my God, they've been here for 2 weeks. What the hell do they know? Why are they giving them, a spotlight to speak at all? Well, the reality of this, the way I look at this and how a curious culture looks at this, is your new person is your biggest asset. They're not encumbered by the biases, the traditions, the culture, the habits that exist. They bring a fresh perspective. So don't look at that new person as someone who just doesn't know. You look at them as your greatest asset. This is not just for CEOs. Yes, you've heard me talk repeatedly that the CEO has to own this, right? The CEO has to define this, what kind of culture they want to build. But the culture then disseminates throughout the entire organization. The C-suite, the executives, the managers, the directors, everyone that has authority, that has anyone under influence of them, whether direct employees or not, helps shape the culture of the organization. So although it starts at the top, it doesn't stop there. So bringing elements of the curious culture and bringing psychological safety, bringing fresh ideas, bringing problem solving to your department, to the parts that you influence, creates breakthrough ready microcultures that you control and can help contribute to the overall positive culture of the organization. Now, a lot of times, this all can seem like it's just nice to have when people talk about culture, right? And I blame Silicon Valley for what I would call some distorted views of culture. When people think about fruit carts and ping pong tables and hoodies, yes, those are all elements of culture. I don't get me wrong. But when I am talking about culture, I am talking about the culture of the organization and the actions or inactions that it drives. And to me, when I started researching for my book, and really looking into some famous leaders who really transformed organizations, Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, he came in, remember correctly, 2013. Now, we all know Microsoft. Microsoft's been around since the 80s, Bill Gates, et cetera. But in those, after 2010, Microsoft had lost some of its it was no longer seen as this innovative company. And Nadella came in and really shifted the culture. He's written about this. There's all kinds of information you can find about it. He was very, very intentional about the culture he was trying to form and create. And he shifted it from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all. He broke down silos to increase collaboration, and he encouraged empathy, experimentation, and psychological safety. Too many times we view culture, we view empathy, we view all of these things as soft skills. But Microsoft, in the rebound it took, or the rebound that occurred, shows that culture change isn't soft. It's strategic. It's literally what helped scale Microsoft to a $4 trillion company. You see the stats there. It was stock price was around $38 a share in 2014 to 400 in 2024. Market cap 300 billion to over 4 trillion. It 10x this company in 10 years. It enabled products like Azure, it created innovation, OpenAI, GitHub, all these partnerships that also came from it. They started thinking outside the box. And yes, we all love Microsoft Suite, but what Microsoft did under Nadella, and it continues to do under Nadella, is really bring about change and innovation. That's really when they stepped into enterprise. It was no more about just your home computers. You know, people all the time talk to me about Office 365, and I have my views about that. I view it as an enterprise system. When I launched Office 365, the full suite of everything for the first time, I ended up working with a Microsoft consultant, tech expert who was certified Microsoft person, and he said, "I do this all day long, and I know 25% of what's capable with Office 365. It truly has become moved away from Microsoft Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. I'm using PowerPoint today, right? It still is those things, but it's moved so far beyond that because of Nadella's leadership and culture change that truly allowed the organization to just change things differently. So I want to summarize a little bit here some takeaways that I believe that you can implement right away. This is not just about you being a leader and having the right ideas. It's about you inviting the rest of the team to come on the journey with you. This is going to take time. I have a friend who constantly reminded us that what change is scary in the beginning, messy in the beginning, and glorious at the end. Something like that, right? Where change is hard. We all know change is hard. Here, everyone do an example, right? You're all on your screens, no one can see you, but whatever hand is your dominant hand, use your opposite hand and pretend you're brushing your teeth. It just feels gross, right? We become habits in how we work. There's the stat is that by 35 years old, your daily 95% of your daily emotions, thinking, and actions are pre-programmed. That means we're not even thinking about it, right? Like I have this same routine every morning when I get up. And yeah, I actually try to challenge myself to use my left hand to brush my teeth just to knock me out of that program just for a little bit and to start my day thinking differently, driving curiosity. And this is coming from a guy who is an operations professional who has made a living of creating streamlined, efficient operations. But I also believe that for process, for procedures, for operations, you have to build it, you have to trust it, then you have to break it. So start small. Start with one question, one conversation, one shift. Learn to listen first and speak second. Probably something most people hear about in relationship therapy, that sort of stuff. but it's not often talked about in leadership, in roles that we play as managers. As I've talked before, you have to communicate this every step of the way. Come out bold, telling them, hey, we want to create a new culture. I want to create a new culture. This is what I want to look like, and here's why. You reinforce that in a meeting, in every email that goes out, every start of every meeting, every day, reinforce that culture that you want to build. So here is 3 steps I believe every one of you can implement right away. Next week is Thursday already. Next week, have 3 curious conversations with staff. Again, do not make this about how they're doing in their job and how you see them doing a job, whether they're doing a good job or not. Sure, to break the ice, say something positive about the job, right? I'm not trying to say that it can't be in there at all. I think it actually is a great icebreaker to say, hey, look, I noticed 2 weeks ago you stepped up and led this great job. But I believe there's actually even more in you. And I want to help you step up. I want to help get more of it. I want to help you help this organization move forward and continue to increase the I'm having a brain fart here. Your influence on the organization and your help and success for the organization. So start with 3 conversations. It can be direct reports, not direct reports. Maybe do a combination of both, right? But have these conversations. Lay the groundwork early on in the conversation. This is an open, honest conversation. Nothing that comes out of this is going to flag you for anything. I want your unvarnished, unfiltered opinions about what's working and not working in this organization. The following week, have a manager curiosity meeting. And that could be, if you're the CEO, it could be your C-suite, your directors. If you're mid-level, your direct reports. So I don't want to create a one-size-fits-all here, but have a meeting with your decision makers. Talk to them about what's working, not working. Hear from them directly, even what they're hearing from the staff. Have that open dialogue with the people directly under you about what's happening, and do it in a group setting. Again, break down the walls, break down the barriers, break down the hierarchy, break down the silos, and have a meaningful, open conversation. The following, now you started the groundwork with some individual conversations, which I encourage you to continue. You had the conversation with at the manager level. Now go to the entire staff or department curious meetings. And I break up staff and department again. We probably have some people on here who have a staff of 10. Some people probably have a staff of 200. The size of your organization would dictate, what that meeting is. And obviously, if it is 200, you can still do that full staff meeting. I'm not saying you can't, but again, it's kind of like working slowly, one step at a time. Doing a smaller departmental meeting, having your managers do that sort of thing. And again, the point of these is to truly start having an open, honest dialogue that moves the needle, creates innovation, growth, and change. And through the entire process, you're going to see your organization get better. You're going to see your team feel more engaged and improve every aspect of your organization by making this change, this cultural change. So as I mentioned before, I think we started recording, I have some resources here. I am going to put in the chat some of the links and everything that are here, link to the book, the Curious Leader Assessment, Curious Culture Assessment. And let me just talk about the Curious assessments real quick. I created these because I have not seen anyone really writing about or working in the curiosity space at this level. I believe that curiosity is that mechanism to unlock innovation, empower teams, and to drive change. And the Curious Leader Assessment is goes through some of your typical archetypes for leadership, traditional, innovative, all that type of stuff. But it has a component that looks at whether or not you are a curious leader. And if you're not a curious leader, what are some ways that you need to improve to reach that? If you are a curious leader, you're probably still not, batting 1,000 everything. So what are the areas that you need to improve to move the needle even further and to create more of a curious leadership in yourself? The Curious Culture Assessment is a full team assessment. We are looking at how the organization views itself from every employee in that organization in helping define what that archetype is, in helping the organization move to a more curious culture. So the QR codes are there. Again, when I stop sharing my video, I'll open up for questions, but I also will be sharing um, the links to everything. So just give me 1 second as I get out of here, out of the sharing the video, and let me get to my saved copy here, and I will also in that will be the link to the next webinar, which is next week, same time, same channel. And we'll be talking about trusting the process. And throughout my career, as I've worked and helped people manage operations, trusting the process, I've learned, is a critical piece that allows for CEOs, owners, founders, managers to truly feel confident in what they're doing. Stop burnout, stop reaction, stop, and truly start being strategic by having a process you can trust. So again, I put some links there, my contact information, my Calendly link if you want to book a. Well, I think I have my Calendly link there. It may be missing. That is my fault. It actually will go out in an email following this for all who registered. So I will be on there. But let me turn over to anyone who has any questions. Feel free to put it in the chat here. Someone said Calendly link is there. Great. So if anyone has any questions, you can. I think it has the opportunity here to raise your hand, and I can call on you, or you can type the question in the chat. Don't be shy. This is open, curious discussions. There's no bad questions. Just here to help any way I can. Obviously, if there's something more personal and direct going on in your organization, and you want to have that conversation privately, obviously, again, feel free to book some time on my calendar. Happy to dive in with you. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about what I do until there's any questions here. But so I got our first question here. I am a new ED with new staff. I like to think that I'm using some of these tips. How do I know? Ask. If there's certain elements that you want to see as a leader in yourself, start asking people. I had when I was one of my change agent COO roles, I had an employee, a director, who I felt was mismanaging their department and micromanaging them. And I had a conversation with her, and she's like, she disagreed, and she's like, but you know what? I want to know. So like we agreed, like I was going to do kind of a informal interview with her staff to get their thoughts and that sort of thing. And it came back, when you ask them, hey, does your boss micromanage you? They would say no. But when I would open up the discussion and say, now, if you're given a task to do and it involves 10 steps and you can get it done in 5 and get the same result, are you in trouble? Oh yeah, we're still in trouble. Like we have to follow the steps. I'm like, well, that's micromanagement. So by having a dialogue, right? Like not just a yes or no question, does your boss micromanage, but breaking down the elements and having a discussion with people. So if you want to be a curious leader and you want to create a psychological safe environment for your staff, ask them. Say, hey, again, one-on-one or a small group meeting, do you guys feel safe to bring me problems, bring me solutions? Do you feel safe bringing it to your manager? If again, it's small, so you guys might not have that hierarchy. But just start asking people, have that open conversation and ask them how they feel. That is the biggest place where I feel that leaders are going wrong, is that when you just make assumptions, when you're going based off of your own intuition, your own viewpoint, your own perspective, you are just guessing. And the only way to get around that guessing is to either do something like an assessment or have some kind of external review, or just start asking the questions. So I hope that was helpful. Any other questions? I'll jump back in here. So I've spent my career in operations, I mentioned earlier. We've now moved much more into a an assessment of your operations, diving in deep and finding the gaps and holes that are existing in an organization and help them fill those in order to move the organization forward. Which again, we touch on the leadership component that I talked about, the operational piece, the trust the process, as well as the culture. We really look at all of those because I've learned throughout my career that you cannot touch one or fix one without touching the others. They all overlap in some way, shape, or form, and you really have to focus on all three of those. Um, do you recommend the assessment for a team of just three? Um, yeah, I mean, look, obviously, the bigger the team, the more diversity of thoughts you're going to have. Uh, the one issue you just mathematically with a team of three is if you have three different, very different perspectives of the organization. Um, there's going to be there's weighted mechanisms in there, but it's going to be harder at the same time if there's consensus with how your organization's culture is viewed. That's where you will probably see the most insight, as opposed to if everyone sees it differently, then again, the report's going to be skewed. But it still can bring some insight. So, even, with a small team, I think it can be very, very helpful in bringing those insights. Most people tend to keep culture assessments anonymized. For the team. Sometimes I think having that open discussion is like, hey, let's talk about each other's reports. So when you do the culture assessment, yes, there is one big report that summarizes the overlapping of everyone on staff, but every individual also gets a report on how they see the organization. So yeah, I think there's still benefit. Again, the one caveat I would give is that everyone sees the organization very, very differently. And so you have 30% negative, neutral, positive, it's going to be skewed a little bit. But if there is some alignment, it will help showcase that. Any other questions? Everyone's kind of sticking around here, so I don't know if they're just waiting to see if others have questions or not. But again, I'm here to help any way I can. If there's anything your organization is struggling with, again, as an operations person, I've touched everything: membership, marketing, legal, accounting, finance, HR, culture, cross departmental, international expansion. There isn't a lot I haven't touched. So I'm always happy to just get on and have a discovery call and learn what's going on. So I will give it one more minute here to see if any other questions pop up. Oh, sorry. There was a Q&A one outside the chat. So let me answer that real quick. Can creating a curious culture work environment positively influence the psyche of a team regarding agile operation changes, which is the foundation of an organization? Yes, and I'm actually so glad you mentioned that. I'm a big fan of talking about, in software world, agile development is really came out when you could work on a website, a software, et cetera, have it be live, but working on the background, right? I believe agile operations is something that should be brought in every organization if you truly want to innovate, grow, and change. And so, yes, I guarantee you that if you start adopting the elements of a curious culture, again, changes are not going to happen overnight. But if you start implementing these little bitty changes that can occur and create this open environment, you are absolutely going to change the psyche of your staff and your team. They're going to change the way they view you, the leaders. They're going to change the way they view the organization. They're going to change the way they view themselves. When you give people the opportunity to speak up, speak out, to make a difference, to show that their value, their opinions, their ideas are that matter in your organization, you are truly going to change things. And if you want to create an agile operation atmosphere, the key to that is doing things real time. When there's a problem, finding out real time, addressing it real time, making the changes real time. That's the only way the way you're describing agile operations, at least as how I would look at it. The only way you're going to be able to do that is by having a curious culture, and you're going to create that environment through these mechanisms, and you're absolutely 100% going to change the psyche of your staff, and that is going to be the foundation for how you can pull off the agile operations. So I really encourage you to join next week's as well. Again, we're going to dive into the process and operations a little bit more, and how to bring curious culture to that, what it means to trust the process, how to trust the process, what to do, from start. Like, John, this is the first time hearing about curious culture. This is first time someone's really talked to me about trusting the process in our organization. I'm going to break down, where to start, what to do, how to do it, and really make this a very actionable thing that I believe will make a difference in organizations. So that was a very insightful question. So thank you. Any other questions? All right, looks like everyone's dropping off here. So again, please reach out to me if I can be of any further assistance to you. And I appreciate everyone joining and hope to see you next week as well. Thanks a lot.